Over the years, I've looked at the civil rights movement and really been very much inspired by the work done by August Wilson. He has created a huge collection of plays, 10 of them by the way, each covering one decade in American history, and specifically looking at the African American experience over that century. Well, I thought I would do the same thing in the context of music, but chose a shorter moment. Rather than 10 centuries, I wanted to take 10 summers, and therefore the name comes out 10 Freedom Summer. It was inspired by his notion of how to look at a century and the way in which you take the primary concept of quest for liberty, human rights and stuff like that, but put it in the context where there's no spoken words, just musical sound, silence, and rhythms expressing this same idea of the experience in America of trying to overcome these opposites of discrimination. So this work is about that notion of freedom, covering just 10 summers. And the last part of this, why the summer is there, is because during the time of the registration that was going on, voters registration, that summer was called Freedom Summer.
One of the most interesting things about Wadada's music is how the scores look. He has really developed a completely new way to really write and for his players to look at music. Some of his earlier music had a lot of color and images in it, and this is one of the most famous examples of that. You can see from this next image all the different colors, all the different shapes, all the different blocks, and those dictate to the player exactly when to do what, but you also have the freedom to make some decisions regarding that. He talks a lot about you can determine what the color red means to you. Are we talking blood red or cherry red? Some of his other works have a little more of a graph-like quality. You can see that in this one, where you have images, you have designations for high and low, the shapes of the way things should move, and a general sense of time and density of the music. So that's another kind of version of his music that you can see, and we have some of this in the music that we're playing this week. Another thing that comes up in his music is all the repeats. There's a lot of different motives and cells, which maybe you play with other people and maybe you don't, that have repeats. Right now you're looking at some of the string quartet work, and you can see how visual the rhythms are and how visually represented the rhythms are. When we get into the repeats, there might be little bits of the page that have an A or a B, and then we have to come up with him the structure for the repeats. A times 2, B times 3. And so a lot of our rehearsal is figuring out the roadmap of what's going on. We have freedom within it, but the whole package comes together with this actual great creative force in it. Here's an example of what 10 Freedom Summers looks like in performance. You'll see the string quartet, you see the harp, you see the golden quartet, and you see the video images behind you. The whole thing comes out to be this amazing collaboration, visual audio collaboration that really is speaking about such an important time in our history. So take a look at a little bit and listen to a little bit of 10 Freedom Summers. Well, hopefully that gives you a little bit of an introduction to the music of Wadada Leo Smith, the amazing trumpet player, composer, improviser that I'm working with this week in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. This has been Notes from the Field, and I'm going to be back with some rehearsal videos and some interviews for you so you can see what this process is like from the inside out. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back live in the studio next week. See you soon.
All right, Lynn took this next short clip in rehearsal today while Wadada was working with the strings.
On this end, what we're going to do is the sound is holding across, just keep it.
Okay.
And Allison and Anthony will mark the changes. So it should be marked on
All right, the next clip is today there was a panel discussion that celebrated Wadada's music and was titled Artistic Emancipation. This is the pianist talking about Wadada and his influence.
Wadada, it was really interesting. It was one of those things where you meet someone and you turn a corner and it changes your direction, what you think you were going to do. So I think this is where I think fits in really nicely with the idea of emancipatory. The emancipatory aesthetic. An emancipatory aesthetic is not only in terms of, of course, doing music about 10 Freedom Summers, about the civil rights struggle, etc., but it also has a correlative in how you work with musicians, how you work with improvisers. So the idea of creating music that it not only frees you to create and explore, but also frees you from yourself. See, frees you from habit. Frees you from what you think you knew before. And that's why I think Wadada's music is so special, because when you engage in his compositions and you begin to play it, you realize quite quickly that it is a world in itself. I mean, there's how he notates music, how I remember during the time in the 70s, he was really working with equivalence of silence and the active-invention system and stuff. Where where there's always, never was a rest, but you knew that each gesture had its equivalence of silence. So this was kind of radical thinking for me in terms of how to structure music and how to think about music.